Do you think your job is safe from disruption by artificial intelligence? What about ours? Will future media outlets need people to sit on passably comfortable stools and read self-referential scripts into a camera? We should all be thinking about this.
AI is affecting almost every line of work you can think of, whether in the form of recruiters automatically screening applicants for vital blue-collar roles, or white-collar workers being replaced with increasingly flexible software.
But that's just the surface, and contrary to popular knee-jerk opinion, it's really not a doom and gloom scenario. Already, entirely new types of jobs are being created. On this episode of AI IRL, you'll hear from this person who's already doing one of them.
We started interacting with these chatbots, especially ChatGPT when it came out, was doing the very basic prompts, and getting the outputs. I'm like, oh, this isn't what I want. How can I prompt it in a better way?
And from people whose jobs involve hiring them.
My belief is that every role will require some level of prompt engineering skills. We might stop calling it prompt engineering.
So if you've never believed you'd hear a genuinely exciting conversation about the future of recruitment, prepare yourself. Dr. Frida Polly, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming in. You have a long background in technology and ethics and AI and neuroscience and all sorts, so we could ask you a huge amount, but we want to talk about jobs and employment, and I'm curious to get your view of where you see the working landscape changing at the moment as a result of AI.
I think there are a lot of different ways that things could go. I think obviously with the advent of generative AI, you're going to see a lot more of that used, right? So I think there will be a time, probably now, but if not now, in the not too distant future, where you will have ChatGPT writing the job descriptions and ChatGPT answering them. So you're going to have computers talking to computers, which I think, I'm not sure what that will do for the quality of, applications and recruitment, but definitely you see a lot more usage of generative AI on both sides of the spectrum. And then when we think about sort of non-generative, just sort of plain old, regular, boring AI, I think that will only continue to be more and more prevalent in the recruiting space for sure, as we think about, automating resume scanning, automating other types of candidate evaluation, interviews, et cetera, et cetera. And I think some of those trends are fantastic because I think it can really lead to looking at populations of candidates that currently are not being evaluated. I think there's a huge opportunity for really opening up the aperture.
When it comes to the employer side, what have you seen happening this year when it comes to AI-based hiring tools? What are they doing now that they couldn't do in the pre-ChatGPT era?
So my perspective in any case is that is more where, we're using AI to write job descriptions, or we're, using it in ways that, while might be making, a hiring manager or recruiter's life easier, is not going to have as much of an impact, I don't think, on the candidate perspective, right? Because at the end of the day, like, who wrote the job description? I don't know that matters as much. It's just making things more efficient on the employer side. I think what candidates are much more concerned about, right, and employers are also increasingly focused on, is the AI that I'm using to make decisions, not necessarily to write job descriptions or, sort of generate sort of stuff that I'm putting out there to the candidate, but the decision-making aspect of AI, which is not the generative type. How is that working? Because I think that's what people are most concerned about.
Let's move into the interview process, because, and this is funny actually, because our exec producer yesterday, we were chatting around all this, made a really good point that in future, you basically want to have an interview to figure out, do you want to sit next to this person for 40 hours a week? And it's like, that's not something an AI is going to solve. How does the interview process change in this context? Like, should we be exhibiting better, more human personalities or characteristics in order to be getting a job, assuming we've beaten the AIs who are fighting each other to even get us in the door?
Well, so let's say we've gone through the first process, which could have some sort of an automation to it. And by the way, generally speaking, when people are using these tools to select candidates at the top, they're not just using an AI, they are using an AI in conjunction with whatever other screening tools the recruiter will be looking at. So it's very rare that it's like 0-1 decision based on an AI, at least from our perspective at Harvard. Once you've gotten into the interview stage, then I think generally speaking, we work with companies that are not automating that process, because I think then it starts to feel pretty creepy to the applicant. Like there's been a lot of talk about, facial analysis and, sort of, automated interviewing, sort of analysis. That I think generally tends to be a little creepy for a lot of employers.
This facial analysis in an interview process.
Yeah.
What, I mean, maybe
You haven't heard?
I've not seen. What is this?
So there was a fair amount of controversy, I would say, maybe a few years back. There was a company called HireVue that was doing a lot of facial analysis, meaning they were sort of analyzing aspects of a person's face, then using that information to automate a yay, nay decision for, whether someone should pass the interview. So the entire interview didn't involve any people in terms of, on the hiring side. And what they were looking at was pretty questionable, I think people felt, in terms of its scientific integrity. They've since discontinued it. There was a lot of uproar about the whole thing, and they sort of said, we're not going to do this anymore. Not to say that there aren't other people that maybe are still doing it.
So we've seen where that can go.
Yeah, so that would be kind of an example of like, hopefully something that won't get repeated, right? Because it was probably ill-advised from the beginning.
When we think of disruptions to the labor force in the past, I think the car manufacturing industry in Detroit, for example, had a really big impact on the folks that built their lives around that one city.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's potential to see kind of an AI rust belt of sorts as AI continues to grow?
I mean, my personal opinion is no. That might be somewhat contrary to what others are thinking, but I have a couple of data points for that. First of all, I mean, I think there was the last decade, people felt the same way with sort of like non-generative AI. Everyone's like, oh my God, it's going to take away all these jobs and the robots are coming and, all these like scary headlines. And I don't think we saw that, you know what I mean? And if anything, the labor market now is way better for an applicant than it was 10 years ago. And
why is that?
Well, that actually has nothing to do with AI. It just has to do with trends, right? It's just basically, demographics basically that we've known about for a long time, with a lot more people having retired from the workforce. And we just haven't sort of, don't have that influx of folks coming in, as well as, a lot of early retirements due to COVID, et cetera, right? We really didn't see this massive disruption of like all these jobs going away because of AI, right? And I would say that I believe very strongly is going to be the case this time around. I mean, I was thinking about this just a second ago. Think about an airplane, okay? An airplane is basically flown by a computer. Did you guys know that? I mean, the pilots don't do a whole hell of a lot, right? However, I would be hard-pressed to find a person that would fly in an airplane without an actual pilot or co-pilot.
That'd be terrifying.
Right?
In a plane. We have trains in London that are completely driverless, but it's not the same as being 30,000 feet up in a compressed tube.
And so my point is simply that I think for so many of the jobs that people are worried are going to get automated away, whether it's, physician or lawyer, the decisions that are being made, I think people would really worry about there not being any kind of human oversight. And we saw that in recruiting as well.
I mean, you mentioned demographics, people, early retirement from COVID, things like that. Do you think there's a risk that AI could actually get blamed for impacts on jobs that just because it's convenient, but actually the reality is that some people are just lazy, or that there's COVID, or there's other broader issues?
Well, so they did this really interesting study where they looked at, national attitudes towards AI, right? So in China, for example, the attitudes were very favorable, and sort of in Western, countries they weren't. And really what they found is that it was really to do with how people's lives had either improved or not improved during the time that AI came to be. Does that make sense? So in the last 10 years, generally speaking, people's lives in China had improved from, sort of more, poverty levels to, better, versus in the West, as we've all talked about, there's income stagnation, growing inequality, et cetera. And I do think a lot of that tends to happen, right? Like, what is new? Oh, AI is new. Oh, that must be the problem, right? So I do think that there's unfortunately some of that going on.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys. Yep.
Justin Ferris, you're a senior director at GitLab. How do you describe prompt engineering to the uninitiated?
Yeah, great question. I use an analogy of a course I took in university called Interpersonal Communications. And what that course teaches you is how to communicate with a human and understand nuance, tone, empathy, nonverbal cues, all these things that aren't obvious if you just read a transcript of a conversation like we're having right now. Those contexts, those pieces are often what you need to pass to a large language model to get better results. So if I simply pass bland, factual text and expect a great result, I may not get it. But if I can pass context, tone, parameters of what I'm expecting or foundational knowledge about the topic to the large language model, then the results I'm going to get are better, and it's going to be a better conversation, right?
So there's a human value, an element that you can't just capture in one basic fact.
I mean, the joke I've heard this year is that the most popular programming language in 2023 is English.
I'm curious, because you've had some conversations recently about whether kids should go to study prompt engineering in school. What would you tell their parents if they said, should I let my kids go to school to study prompt engineering?
It's a good question. I would steer them away from pursuing an explicit career in prompt engineering. Instead, what I would tell them is, hey, go pursue your passion. What are you passionate about? Are you passionate about teaching or philosophy or psychology? Maybe it's traditional software engineering, but then figure out how to layer in those prompt engineering skills. They can be self-taught, most are. We've all learned these things over the past several months. But learn those skills on the job or within the context of the work you're doing in university versus pursuing an explicit degree in that.
I don't know. I've seen some of these buzzy prompt engineering jobs pop up that have like $300,000 salaries. I would kind of maybe steer my kid towards that direction, but what's your take on it?
So the challenge is these large language models will get better and more sophisticated over time. So if I was entering university today, 4 years from now, I don't know what that's going to be. And I honestly don't know if there's a professor teaching those courses in university that can train me effectively.
So the job might not exist in a few years.
Yeah, and really the reason why those folks are commanding such great compensation is that they also possess domain expertise in their field.
So the foundation, not just how to trick the model.
That's right, exactly. So if I know everything about building bridges, right? But I don't know anything about prompt engineering, I can understand if a model is hallucinating, if it's giving me the right answers, if it's helping assist my firm in building great bridges. And that is more powerful to use in that context than someone who's just really good at manipulating a model. Now, that bridge expert should also gain those skills to use that tool, just like they've had to learn how to use Microsoft Excel or some other tool, right, in their career. But it's that domain knowledge that's more valuable, in my opinion, than pure prompt engineering skills.
So they take the major in architecture and design, but they do a minor in prompt engineering, not the other way around.
That's a great way to say it. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I would advise that. I agree. Yeah.
A lot of the conversation around artificial intelligence revolves around the fear that it's going to displace people's jobs. And so prompt engineering, whether it's as a job description or as a role overall, is one of those jobs that's emerging that could potentially gain some traction as AI continues to grow.
Mm-hmm.
However, it doesn't necessarily require a college degree. And you're seeing a lot of YouTubers and other personalities basically teach this stuff to people online without having to go to school. What do you think about that?
I love it. And so typically these very technical things over the years have been reserved for very good engineers to implement. But now you can watch a YouTube video, you can learn a little bit about how to wire things together, and you can build something really cool without any formal training. That is magical to me. And I think that future is in front of us, empowering more and more people to contribute in different ways that they never have been able to before.
I've never discounted learning from YouTubers, ever. So why would you hire a prompt engineer versus somebody who can just do the stuff without needing to prompt?
Yeah, I think about it as an efficiency gain. So someone who has prompt engineering skills that can leverage these large language models, could be 10 times more efficient than someone who doesn't have those skills. Feel strongly about that person having the domain understanding and context to prompt that effectively. So if all they were good at was prompt engineering, I probably wouldn't hire them. But if they had a really specialized skill or some domain understanding of a topic that we needed, and then those prompt engineering skills, they will likely be 10x more effective in their role than someone who doesn't have the prompt engineering skill.
And what do you think prompt engineering will look like in 12 months' time?
Yeah, in 12 months' time, I think more and more people will use it. We're so early, right? Everyone in tech is talking about it, but it hasn't sort of crossed the chasm where everyone else is using it. And so even within a technical company like the one I work in, our marketers aren't fully using it yet. Our sales folks aren't fully using it. The people that aren't inherently technical in their role aren't quite using it yet to the full extent. And so what we're going to see is more and more fields, more and more domains, more and more roles start to leverage these tools to be effective in their role.
Do you think these skills are going to be taught say in elementary school, middle school, or even high school?
Should they?
I think, like in anything, teaching students how to think critically, how to ask good questions, how to challenge an answer and a result and deeply understand why is a very, very transferable skill to any field, right? Apply that to prompt engineering and learn the technical nuances of it from YouTube, and those people will be successful in the field.
So let's say someone's watching this and you've convinced them that prompt engineering is a fantastic way for them to earn their next meal. What are like 3 top tips that they should have to becoming a prompt engineer?
Sure, yeah. The first one I'd say is get a free account of any one of these tools and experiment. The best way you can learn is trial by error, so start doing that today. The second I would say is actually do a little bit of research to understand how these models are actually built. You don't need to become an expert by any means in AI or ML, but know that these actually aren't sentient beings you're having a conversation with. They're just machines that are really good at pattern matching. And then lastly, start to experiment with multimodal or multi-prompt queries. So have a conversation with one of these systems and pass it more data and expect to get the result you want out of the 10th query, not the first one. Because when you do that, you're giving the model a lot of context and domain understanding to yield better results down the road, but you may not get that on the first query.
Well, Justin Faris, thank you for prompting such an interesting and timely discussion. I've been sitting on that since we came in this room.
Very good.
Tiffany Jansen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here.
So you're a software developer and the founder of Tiffin Tech. And if I understand correctly, it's a community that talks about coding, culture, all things technology across YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. You didn't start off in the tech world. So why don't you walk us through a little bit about how you ended up in it?
When I first graduated high school, I thought, I really want to get into fashion because it includes, building different things, the creativity side of things, but also using the logical side of things as well. And from there, ended up going to school for fashion, got an opportunity to go overseas to Hong Kong for modeling. I'm like, you know what, let's go travel the world, let's see what's out there. So I did that. And it was during my time there, I was like, I really am craving more furthering my education again. I just don't really know what that looks like. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go back to Canada, where I'm from, and go to school. And I went to university for graphic communications management, which is essentially what it sounds like. It's a bit of graphic design, a bit of management courses.
Did you know what role you wanted to end up in?
I knew I still wanted to stay in fashion. I was like, okay, I'll apply this to the fashion industry to some capacity. And it was in my last year of university, it was required to take a very basic coding course. And I was like, I would never have taken it otherwise. I was like, this is incredible. Like I get to, whatever comes to my mind, I can actually build. Like, this is amazing. So then I started teaching myself some JavaScript, and I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing. And from there, went to a coding bootcamp, and from there ended up working at large tech companies, startups, and it was really through that journey which led me to starting Tiffin Tech.
So we've talked a lot about prompt engineering, which is something that I know you're very interested in and do a lot with. Can you sort of describe a little bit about how you use that skill set?
For sure. It's really, Nate, it's evolved over time, like many of us when we started interacting with these chatbots, especially ChatGPT when it came out almost 2 years ago now, which feels like on one hand just yesterday. I was, doing the very basic prompts, and getting the outputs. I'm like, oh, this isn't what I want. How can I prompt it in a better way? And that's really how it started. And then I started using tools like GitHub's Copilot, which essentially you're prompting it as well, but it's more related to code-specific tasks. The same kind of goal with prompting and then having a specific output. And it was through that I kind of got obsessed with understanding how I could prompt better and started doing a lot of reading on it, ended up taking some courses on it online, and it's kind of evolved ever since, just continuous.
And now you offer courses kind of on your own YouTube channel for others to learn. I mean, so it sounds like it took a lot of trial and error. There wasn't like a specific course you go to college to kind of go back to school for this kind of thing. It's independent kind of work.
Correct, exactly. It's something that, if you are interested in it, you can learn at home on your own. I do come from a technical background prior to getting into prompt engineering, but it's not required necessarily. You can come if it's something anyone is interested in. There's so many resources available online that you can, start learning it today, essentially.
Isn't that an amazing part of this new era?
It is, and I think you're a really good example of a key point here, which is you spent a lot of time pursuing fashion and modeling, but actually you ended up doing this, and now essentially your job is doing something that did not exist and could not be aspired to. And I wondered, can you just tell us a little bit about how long you think what you do now has actually existed for? Because a lot of people talk about there being new types of jobs and new opportunities being created, and you're kind of one of the people that's got one of those jobs.
It's super interesting, and it's kind of evolved over time from pure software development to starting to bring prompt engineering into my day-to-day. I think sometimes when we think about the future and future jobs, it's this stark that all of a sudden one day we'll be like, oh, this job exists. But I feel like from my experience, it evolves over time. And that's what I found with incorporating prompt engineering into my day-to-day. I know there are so many companies who are hiring specifically for a prompt engineer. And then there's also people like myself who use prompt engineering within their career, within their day-to-day.
For someone that is preparing for a role in the future in this new age of AI, what is the greatest skill that they should be developing now?
It's funny, I actually asked this recently on my social media, and I just wanted to hear what other people had to say. And it was a poll, and it was between, would it be a soft skill or a technical skill? And because my audience, for the most part, is pretty technical, it was quite significant. People voted that technical skills are going to be the most important skills in the future. However, even as a technical person, I really disagree with that. I think soft skills, especially the willingness and ability to be open-minded and continuing to learn, be a forever learner, is more important than ever. And now this might not be a specific skill, but having that mindset in the sense of technology and artificial intelligence is changing and growing so rapidly that there are two ways you can look at it. You can embrace it and grow with it, use these tools, or you can do the opposite. But then in turn, someone who's using this technology will continue to excel.
Are you talking about the value of human, like the value of being a person, basically, having longevity still?
Exactly.
So really, there are always going to be certain roles where people want people. Is that do you believe that?
100%. It's that human interaction that we crave, or that there's this trust factor as well with interacting with other humans versus technology. So yes, I think it will remain important, and even maybe grow more important as technology continues to become more ingrained in our lives. We'll crave that even more.
Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
IRL.